Hey, welcome back to my channel. This is Barley's Bookshop, and I am Steven. And today I just wanted to talk about a word that we use a lot in literature, right? A word that we use in reading circles. I just want to talk about classics. When I say classic literature or have you read any classics, that brings to mind, kind of a smaller subset genre, smaller collection of books that are generally accepted as classics. But that's such a vague term, right? And also, as time goes on, classics it's kind of a nebulous, growing, ever moving thing too. So I think that's a fascinating discussion. I wish that instead of recording a video, as I say on, whenever I make like a video for like Book Talk or something, I always say like it would be so much better than instead of sitting here making a video. I wish we could just sit in a circle and talk about things like this and in a give and take fashion. But hey, one day, maybe one day. So when we talk about classics, we usually have certain books will come to mind. I bring it up because I'm almost to a 2-year anniversary for me. January will be like a 2-year mark for me for my reading renaissance, shall I call it. It was January of 2024 that something in me was just like, you need to rediscover, you need to fall back in love with reading. And it's not that I ever stopped like wanting to read or didn't love reading anymore or anything like that. It's just I allowed it to, I guess, fade. I allowed it to get pushed aside by other things in life and jobs and family and obligations and all. That's what happens, right? But it's what you set your mind to and say, no, this is going to be important to me. This is going to be a priority for me. And reading became that in January of 2024. And here I am almost 2 years. And I didn't know it was going to become what it is to me now, which is just something that I absolutely love to do. And back in January of 2024, I made a commitment that I wanted to read at least one book a month. My goal was to read 12 books in the year 2024, just so that I was consistently reading. And I feel like for me, if you read, you're a reader. We're not going to talk quantities and books and how much and meeting your goals. I mean, it's great to set goals, but like if you read, you're a reader. If you love to write, if you write, stories, or if you're working on a book, if you write poetry, if you write, you're a writer. And anything beyond that kind of goes into like other details. But if you read, you're a reader. And in January 2024, I started reading and started to read again in a way that I just was reading for enjoyment and really making it a priority. And along the way, to get back to what I was talking about, I wanted to make sure that I picked up some classics, if you will, some classics along the way. And I've read just a few. I wish I could say, 22 months later, that I've read like, oh my goodness, I've read all these classics. It's not the case. I wish it was the case, but it's not. But I also find it interesting that here we are in 2025. I think back to when I was younger or a student or in high school and college, like when we thought classics, what did that bring to mind? Here we are 20 something years later, 30 something years later. What is now considered a classic? When does a book become a classic? And then what are we reading now? What new books, new releases are we reading in 2025 or last year, or or new releases coming out next year that fast forward a couple decades or 25 years, like those will be considered classics. To me, like I said, topics like this are like really cool and fascinating, and I love to hear people talk about it. I definitely love hearing people talk about things like this more than I enjoy hearing myself talk about it. But But hey, I only have me right now, so I guess I'll do the talking. And hopefully you guys can jump on my comment section and continue this give and take, this conversation of classics and classics that you've read that you loved, books that you have read recently, that may eventually become classics. And that, because that's what I find to be a fascinating topic. So for example, if you've ever watched any of my videos, you know I always mention my favorite book, and it's a classic, and it's called East of Eden by John Steinbeck. And I recently read Grapes of Wrath. I think I posted a couple shorts about my experience with Grapes of Wrath. I know I did a book review over on my Book Talk channel. And if you don't follow me over there, I am Steven21 is my Book Talk handle over there. I talked a little bit about Grapes of Wrath. Definitely a classic. So I have read 4 John Steinbeck books, but East of Eden is kind of this was the first classic that I read in the past couple of years when I started my new reading journey. And this immediately became, like, to me, I think this is the best book ever written. This is my favorite book that I've ever read. I think it will stay that way. I say that all the time. I talk about this book all the time. But in this 2-year journey, this was kind of like the first one. And then my most recent one is Grapes of Wrath, which I talked about recently. So I kind of have bookended my classics with John Steinbeck, East of Eden, and John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath. Another classic that I read, and this goes back, I think, about a year ago, 12 or so months ago, is I read Stoner by John Williams. Stoner's one of my favorite books. I just told you that East of Eden is my favorite book. Yeah, it is. Stoner is up in my upper echelon, top tier, top shelf of, like, this is one of my favorite books I've ever read. This is also, I think, one of the best books ever written in regards to structure. The prose, just the structure of the prose that John Williams does with Stoner. I adore this book. And this is a very quiet book and a very kind of a slow, if you will, book. This is a classic. This is literary fiction at its finest, because I always kind of joke about Stoner, and people say, "Oh, you love that book. What do you like? What happens?" Well, not much. I'd say that's always my response. But this is a classic. It's widely accepted as such. One of my favorite books I've ever read. Just the connection kind of that I felt to the main character Stoner and his journey, what his life was, what he dedicated himself to, what he gained and obtained, but what he lost and sacrificed. I think that book is just fascinating. Another book that I read that in the past couple years that I definitely consider a classic is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. I love this cover, but I know, like, on the screen it kind of might come up a little weird. This is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. If you haven't read this book, do yourself a favor and pick up Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This is so good. A story about a young Black man and his experience in the, newly emancipated South, just the deep racist South, and then this same man's experience as he goes into the New York area in Harlem, and just the experiences he has there as well, both differences and similarities of what he experiences, just the different turns his life takes. If you haven't read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, that's a classic. Absolutely worth reading. And then it was January of this year that I picked up this one, and you can't really see what this is, but this is The Count of Monte Cristo. I had been telling myself for so long, to pick up this book and read it, and you can see this is a big guy. Count of Monte Cristo is a really big book, but it's so fun to read. When I pick up books like this, like big, chunky, big books like this, the main thing is like, I just don't want to put any time constraints, no rules, and I'm going to read this many pages per day and I'll get done with it. No, I want to read it. And if however long it takes, however many pages I read on a whatever day, no problem. And I read this quicker than I thought I would because it's so enjoyable. Just so enjoyable. The ultimate best story of revenge is the Count of Monte Cristo. And one of my favorite characters I've ever read in any book is Edmond Dantes. Pick that book up if you haven't read. So my question is like, what books are going to be soon like, oh, that's a classic? Like, for example, here's a book that was written in the 80s, The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Is this a classic? And if not, it needs to be. Like, when we talk about classics, has this crossed over into that realm of classics? This book is amazing, powerful, heavy, heartbreaking, but says so much. I love that book. Here's a kind of, to me, like an obvious one. This was written, I think, in 1985 or something like that. Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. If this isn't on the shelf as a classic, it needs to be. If when you create a list of books that are classics, I know we always go back to these older books. So this book is written in the 80s, but how much longer do we have to wait to say this is a classic? I'm not a Western kind of guy. This is the only Western I've ever read, but Lonesome Dove is maybe some of the best, actually not maybe, some of the absolute best character work I've ever seen in literature. I read this big book. I mean, it's 1,000 pages. I'm opening it up to find out. It's like right under 1,000, 900, a little under 900 pages long, okay? Big guy, right? When I finished it, I was like, I wanted more. I was so sad to see it, and then I was so sad to say goodbye to the characters. That's how good it is. Here are a few that I'm like, these are classics. Years from now, we're going to talk about these books as classics. One is The Kite Runner. This is an absolute classic. I don't know how many years we have to wait for it to age, but The Kite Runner, and I could easily also be holding up 1,000 Splendid Suns. Two brilliant books by Khaled Hosseini that I think are like modern day classics. Absolutely a modern day classic. Here's a newer book that, wow, blew me away. Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. If you haven't heard of this, if you haven't read Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, this spans generations and generations and how Yaa Gyasi weaves together this story where each chapter is a different character from a different generation. I can't go, that doesn't even begin to do justice to the brilliance, the power, the magnitude, and so beautiful. This book is so beautifully written. Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. And then lastly, James by Percival Everett. To me, this is a modern day classic. If you've read Huckleberry Finn and also James, great. If you haven't read Huckleberry Finn, you can read James and still completely appreciate this story. This is not a retelling of Huckleberry Finn. James is a telling. This is James telling his story to you, the reader. He is not retelling the story of Huckleberry Finn. James is brilliant. Percival Everett is a brilliant author. To me, I'm holding a modern day classic that years and years from now, when we talk about classics, James, I'm confident, will be in that conversation. I really think Homegoing should also be in that conversation. I am confident also that Kite Runner, as well as 1,000 Splendid Suns, will be in that conversation. What am I missing? Why don't you jump in my comments and let me know what am I missing? What books do you think are instant classics, are modern day classics? What books will we be talking about as classics years from now? Jump in my comments. I love to keep this conversation going. As always, have a great day and read a good book.